On April 14, 1865, John Wilkes Booth fatally shot the president Abraham Lincoln while Lincoln was watching a highly anticipated performance of the popular play Our American Cousin. The aftermath of Lincoln's assassination resonated across the country, generating a ripple effect that would have vast ramifications for the future of the United States. Today, we're discussing the direct aftermath of Abraham Lincoln's assassination. But before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the History on a Thread channel. And don't forget to leave a comment and let us know what exciting topics you would like to hear about next. Okay, let's travel back to one of America's darkest days. The night of April 14th should have been like any other at Ford's Theatre. The extremely popular play Our American Cousin staged what they truly believed would be a massively successful performance that night. Knowing Lincoln would be attending, the players even changed a line in the play as a sort of shout out to the president. The line, "Well, you're not the only one who wants to escape the draft," was delivered as, "The draft has already been stopped by order of the president." This was allegedly quite hilarious. As the audience erupted with laughter, John Wilkes Booth seized his opportunity. Booth was an actor and he knew the play well. He knew the joke was coming and bided his time, knowing the laughter would mask the sound of his Derringer pistol. When the moment came, he snuck into Lincoln's box and fired. He got into a stab fight with Henry Rathbone, an army officer who had been sharing the president's box, and either jumped or was thrown to the stage below, shattering his leg. As Booth fell to his debut on the Ford Theatre stage, he shouted Virginia's state motto, "Sic semper tyrannis," which is Latin for "thus always to tyrants," for those of you who don't speak Latin. He then beat a hasty retreat. Well, as hasty as a one-legged man can be. Despite the broken limb, Booth managed to escape and stay on the run for 12 days. Members of the 16th New York Cavalry pursued Booth, finally catching up to him on April the 26th. The manhunt would be one of the largest in American history. Booth met up with a co-conspirator, David Herold, and eventually made his way across the Potomac into more friendly territory. Authorities eventually found them taking refuge in a barn belonging to Richard Garrett of Bowling Green, Virginia. To draw him out, the soldiers set the barn ablaze, which is a surefire way to get someone to come outside, pun intended. Booth was forced out into the open and was immediately gunned down by the cavalry. They even stabbed Booth's body with a knife to make sure his ticket had been thoroughly punched. Booth's remains were taken back to Washington, D.C., where they were placed under heavy guard in the White House's state dining room. Apparently, they were worried someone might steal him, or that he was going to turn into a zombie. After his death, a funeral train transported Abraham Lincoln's body across the United States to its final burial location in Springfield, Illinois. The train stopped at 180 different cities, like a Van Halen tour. At each stop, Lincoln's coffin was placed in a town hall, where crowds of people waited in line for hours to pay their respects to the president. Lincoln was buried on Easter, which was declared a national day of mourning in his honor. Despite its ties to Lincoln's assassination, Our American Cousin remained a popular play. So popular, in fact, that 1 year after the tragedy at Ford's Theatre, John Sleeper Clark, who happened to be John Wilkes Booth's brother-in-law, illegally staged a version at New York City's Winter Garden Theatre. That's a real Kato Kaelin move. Even though he advertised the show in the newspaper, he hadn't actually paid for the rights to stage the play. Clark had poached the play from Laura Keene, a successful actress who had run Our American Cousin for 150 successful nights at her own theatre. Unlike Clark, she actually possessed the rights, so she sued him. This did little to prevent Clark from continuing to stage his own version, even as courts worked on the case. The dude was desperate to make some money off his notorious brother-in-law. Following Lincoln's assassination, his vice president Andrew Johnson had to fill the gap left by the great man, and it was a pretty big stovepipe hat to fill. Furthermore, Johnson didn't exactly agree with Lincoln's vision for the future of America. Consequently, he tried his best to veto some of the Reconstruction Amendments. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, better known as the Reconstruction Amendments, came about shortly after the Civil War. Intended to aid the country in its long road to recovery, these amendments would become some of the most important in the document's history. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery and established an end to the practice in the United States, stating, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." Wait, what was that "except" part? That doesn't seem like it belongs in a law banning slavery. The 14th Amendment provided citizenship to former slaves. It included two pivotal provisions: all persons born or naturalized in the United States, and the clause, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protections of the laws. Finally, the 15th Amendment gave Black Americans the right to vote and prevented any state from taking that right away. The newly minted President Johnson didn't take long to raise objections to the 14th Amendment. His objections range from believing each state should decide who could vote to not wanting to pass an amendment until the Confederate States were again part of the Union. Johnson ultimately vetoed the 14th Amendment, but Congress overrode his veto and the amendment became law. Johnson kept clashing with Congress until they'd finally had enough and impeached him. He came within one vote of being removed from office. Not the best performance review. Eventually, the Reconstruction Acts of 1867 allowed the southern states to become part of the United States again, serving an integral role in the country's history. Although the laws allowed people to marry freely and own property, the subsequent years were marred by oppression of Black Americans, with the passing of Jim Crow laws by some state and local governments, many of those laws persisting until the 1960s. Meanwhile, President Andrew Johnson went on to serve a single presidential term and went down in history for his inept political moves. Although most of us only know the penny as the tiny Lincoln portraits that collect in the sock drawer, they didn't take on their current form until after Lincoln's death. The first pennies contained an image of a woman with flowing hair, dubbed Lady Liberty. They were also made from pure copper rather than the copper zinc blend they contain today. Around 1857, the US Mint began making smaller pennies composed of copper and nickel. These pennies had a flying eagle image instead of the woman who had held the role for nearly a century, because America had a thing with eagles. Fast forward to 1909, when Victor David Brenner became a designer for the US Mint. Brenner was a bit of a trailblazer when it came to coins. He designed the first coin to have a real person on it. In this case, Brenner chose to depict President Lincoln based on a conversation he had about a Lincoln plaque with President Theodore Roosevelt. This new penny changed everything. Roosevelt loved the idea of having faces on coins, possibly because he assumed his face would one day be featured on one. The penny underwent several changes over the years, first containing ears of wheat opposite President Lincoln's profile, followed by the Lincoln Memorial until 2008, when penny designs fluctuated with 4 different designs. For many of us, President's Day is just like any other Monday, except we don't get any mail and we can't go to the bank. Nobody gets together to sing President carols or exchange gifts beneath the cherry tree. But the holiday began as a celebration of George Washington's birthday. It wasn't officially altered to include Lincoln's big day until the late 1960s. Before that year, the holiday was celebrated on February 22nd. It was changed to the third Monday in February following the Uniform Monday Holiday Act of 1968 and was extended to honor Lincoln, born on February 12th, and George Washington, born on February 22nd. The tradition continues today, although 13 states don't observe this holiday, including Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Delaware, Wisconsin, Louisiana, Rhode Island, North Carolina, New Mexico, and Ohio. The time between Lincoln's assassination and the invention of television isn't as long as you might think. For instance, fax machines already existed by the time the Civil War broke out. The Confederacy could have potentially faxed its surrender to Appomattox, except there wasn't a Kinko's there yet. The first televisions began to roll out in the 1920s, only about 50 years after Lincoln got whacked. For perspective, that's roughly the same amount of time between the assassination of John F. Kennedy and the third A Hangover movie. Some early popular genres of TV shows were quiz shows and interview shows. Consequently, a man who had witnessed Lincoln's fate at Ford's Theatre was actually on a TV quiz show in the 1950s. A 1956 episode of I've Got a Secret, a panel quiz show in which the panelists were tasked with guessing a contestant's unbelievable secret, featured 95-year-old Samuel J. Seymour. Seymour's story was that, when he was 5 years old, he happened to be in the audience at Ford's Theatre when Lincoln was shot. As he told the panelists and audience that day, he saw Booth leap from the stage and break his leg. Because he was a little kid, he didn't realize the significance of what he had witnessed. He just remembered being concerned for the person who fell out of the balcony. So, what did you think? What was the most surprising thing that happened after that night at Ford's Theatre? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from History on a Thread.